Aloha, this is Skye with FNN, Feminist News Network, the feminist news that's right for you. Thanks for coming, thanks for joining, I appreciate you subscribing. We're in the Rainbow Room, oh yeah. So today, what are we gonna do? We're gonna go to the ACLU Smart Justice event. What is it? The MoneyBail for a Better Hawaii, Better Nation. That's right. For a better Hawaii, better nation. That's right. That's what we need. Because it's getting bad in Hawaii. The people of color here and the poor people or low income of Hawaii are the main ones that are stuck. And what is it doing? It's costing their homes, it's costing their jobs, it's costing their lives. And we're going to take a look at the panel of ACLU attorney that had Twyla Carter that has came in from New York's main base and national headquarters to talk and mention how this can help work for Hawaii by having no money bail. And we also have, we got Krisha Darte, who is a local deputy, public defender, and she's going to put her input on what's really going on in Hawaii's bail system and parole system. So we're going to go down to Marks and Arts Garage down in Chinatown in Honolulu and take a look at the panel, and afterwards we're going to discuss and see what's really going on with no money bail. Because it says Hawaii cannot end mass incarceration without ending the money bail system. Hawaii cannot end mass incarceration without ending the money bail system. We're going to go and check out the panel and see what's going on. All right. Coming at you today from Marks and Arts Garage in downtown Chinatown, Honolulu, Hawaii. And what are we going to do today? Take a look at the Hawaii bail system. Is it good? Is it right for us? Is it discriminating against the homeless and the low income and the poor and the people of color and the indigenous and the local Hawaiian Aina? Yes, it is. Now we're going to take a look at a distinguished panel. Twyla Carter has came in from New York to be a part of this panel discussion event. And we're going to take a look to see what we can do about Hawaii's bail system. All right.
Confirmed with the judge. That's the initial bail amount that's listed. That individual normally has a hearing within 48 hours. If that's the weekend, that's the first business day. And at that time, they appear in front of a judge who generally confirms those bail amounts. To be fair, for misdemeanor and petty misdemeanor offenses, the likelihood of you being able to advocate for some type of release on own recognizance, which is release without any terms and conditions, just release with essentially a promise to come back, that happens more frequently. With felony offenses, it's a little bit different because there's different ways of charging, and under our statute, before someone can be charged with a felony offense formally, they have to, the court has to make a determination of probable cause. And there's different ways that that can happen. There is, as I stated earlier, general guidelines, and I use the quotes because it's not written down anymore. They were used in practice before by the prosecutor's office. It's my understanding they're no longer using it, but there are general guidelines for what constitutes a normal bail for a Class C felony, a Class B felony, and a Class A felony. Obviously with Class A felonies, we're talking about extremely serious offenses sometimes, so the bail amounts can really diverge there. That's one way that bail gets set for felonies. Another way that bail gets set for felonies is there is sometimes an actual hearing as opposed to just a phone call with the judge or some discussion with the judge about the bail amount. There is sometimes a hearing where there is a prosecutor and the judge, no defense attorney, no defendant, and the prosecutor makes arguments to the judge on why the bail amount should be set in this amount. The judge normally confirms that amount and then a warrant is issued for that individual. So we're talking about how someone can then post bail. As we've already discussed, generally an individual can say that they want to pay the entire amount and then they can be released with paying that entire amount. There's the bond, we've already talked about that, but I think one thing that's important and perhaps unique to Hawaii is that we don't have 24-hour bail bond when somebody has been transferred to certain facilities. If they are in the custody of the Honolulu Police Department, meaning they have not yet been transferred to a facility like OCCC, which is our jail, they have the opportunity to post a bail or a bond through the jail, is my experience. I'm sorry, through HPD, the police department, which is my experience. But once they go to the jail in Hawaii, they're required to either, if they're posting the cash bail, they need to go to the cashier's office, or their family member goes there, pays the bail amount, gets a receipt, takes it to the jail, who then reviews the receipt, confirms that that's the amount that was supposed to be posted, that they're not being held on any other matters, and then they're released. That means that it has to be a cashier's office, which is only open during normal business hours, which is generally 7:45 until 4:30 p.m. because it's a state office. That also means that even if you want to post bond, that is where the bond company goes. They go to that same cashier and they have to pay the amount there and then also deliver the receipt. So that's what makes Hawaii somewhat unique and why it exacerbates some of the bail issues here. Because you can't just bail out whenever you want. If it's on the weekend and you're at the jail, your family wants to bail you out, it cannot happen.
I wanted to kind of open the conversation about, why are we talking about bail now nationally and kind of what is going on around the United States?
So as we talked about already, the effect of bail on the community at large, on the general population, is huge. It's one of the direct paths to mass incarceration that we have in this country. So we are seeing a lot of lawsuits taking place and litigation around the country around this particular issue. But it's a complicated issue and it's an ongoing area of law that is being litigated through. By example, I will explain what's happening, I guess, in two cases that are happening in Alabama, for example. We have a case called Schultz versus Alabama, which is a federal challenge to the use of MoneyBail system. They use bail schedules, and we haven't talked about that, but the idea of a bail schedule is a generally a pre-printed list of charges, criminal charges that have a dollar amount or a dollar range attached to that charge. So trespass, for example, would be $1,000, just for example. And if I'm arrested today on an allegation of trespass, I go to the jail. As Krishna said, I will pay the $1,000 and I get out. If I don't have the $1,000, then I am in jail. And that is unconstitutional. That is blatantly unconstitutional, because the law requires, the federal law as well as your state constitution requires that individualized, that Krishna already talked about, the individualized assessment that a judge is supposed to make on each and every accused person that comes before the court. So that dollar amount should not be consistent across the board. I should be asked if I can afford it. There has to be a consideration made to less restrictive means. Are there any other things that can be done before cash bail is put on me to ensure that I'm going to come back to court and to ensure that I'm not going to be a danger to the community? Found that the Coleman County bail practice deprived indigent criminal defendants of equal protection of the law, and that the state's justifications for treating wealthy and poor defendants differently were, quote, illusory and conspicuously arbitrary. And that the court found that the judge needed to find by clear and convincing evidence, which is the standard of law that was required, and provide that in written findings to show that defendants could be held on cash bail. When you compare that to another case that came out of Alabama, which is the Edwards versus Cofield case, the exact same lawsuit, pretty much, same facts, filed by the same parties, ACLU National with the local affiliate, with the two other organizations, and the judge in that case actually denied the preliminary injunction motion, which was the motion that we made to say, please urgently stop these practices, they're unconstitutional. So you have the same state, two different courts coming to two different conclusions. And I bring that up because, again, this is an ever-changing area of law where this litigation is happening right now. And I'm going to go ahead and say this, but if you took the time to watch the Kavanaugh hearings today and understand the importance of the Supreme Court justice, I will tell you that our current president is appointing federal judges right now that don't have to be approved by anybody, and those appointees are making decisions and affecting the trajectory of where we are going in our country on issues like bail reform.
As Kirsha said, in Hawaii we don't have always, written down bail schedules, but in practice there are bail schedules. In fact, when we prepared a report that came out earlier this year, we found that 90% of the time the amount set on the warrant, which is pretty much just based on the charge, was followed at the first appearance. So essentially the court did not change it once the person appeared before the court, which essentially translates into having bail schedules, 90% of the time. And I think this ties into the questions, which is, how does bail relate to mass incarceration? And, what role does, for example, taking a plea deal play in getting out of jail in Hawaii or just anywhere? And how many people do you usually plea out just to get out of jail?
Just to give you kind of, I guess, the idea of how long it takes to resolve their pretrial incarceration and pretrial release is most problematic, because that's where it's the hardest to gain pretrial release. So just to give you some insight, someone will get arraigned on a felony offense. Their trial week will be set 9 weeks from their arraignment. If they do a plea in the week, normally there's maybe a hearing the week before the trial week, maybe 2 weeks before. If they do a change of plea where they are entering guilt or pleading no contest, the sentencing report, which is required by statute in all felony matters, unless the prosecutor agrees to waive that, which I can tell you that that very rarely happens, is another 9 weeks to prepare that report. So you're looking at, on average, even if somebody fast tracks their case by trying to do a plea as soon as possible, they're going to be incarcerated for approximately 4 months before the judge determines a sentence. It's an agency affiliated with the jail who meets with the individual, sometimes does some minimal research into proposed sponsors or persons that the individual is seeking to be released to, and does kind of a cursory investigation in order to recommend to the judge whether or not this person should be released. But that report normally takes 2 weeks to prepare. So when we're talking about, yes, that there are options and there's ways to try and obtain some type of release, but
also indicate that across the board in criminal cases, approximately 90% of all criminal cases are generally resolved by a guilty plea. So then think of the collateral consequences that come from that. And also think about the fact of what we are doing with regards to, again, our so-called criminal justice system. You have people that are pleading guilty to get out of jail. So they may not have even actually done the crime that they were accused of. And you know that the bail system is flawed when a person who has access to money and resources, who might actually be a danger to the community, can pay to get out of jail, and a poor person who throws a rock through the window cannot. And that is our system. And the collateral consequences that flow from a criminal conviction on your record. It can lead to your deportation, losing all of your federal benefits, your housing, your schooling, everything we've already talked about. And that is very real in this country. There is no such thing as you've done your time and now you're back out. We continue to punish people over and over again by not letting them restore themselves as citizens of our community and contribute back and take care of their families.
For example, in this country, we have a long history of racial segregation in housing in education policies, in employment policies. Those compound over time, so there's a high degree of correlation between socioeconomic status and race. And because there's a high degree of correlation between socioeconomic status and race, the type of policing that is done in predominantly black communities looks very different than the type of policing that's done in predominantly white communities. That means there may be more, for example, drug arrests in black communities and other communities of color. We know from Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration studies that drug use rates are roughly equal between whites and blacks. They're essentially within a margin of error, within about 1%, We also know that a black drug user is approximately 7 to 8 times more likely to be arrested, convicted, and incarcerated than a white drug user. So as we're thinking about the role of race in these systems, we should make sure that we're thinking in those 3 terms: conscious racism, unconscious racism, and institutional racism, because they can affect the way that we think about the problems in very different ways.
So when we think about the criminal legal system and we talk about bail, that is actually so far down the line from where this problem has occurred. It starts at birth on how we treat black and brown children, all the way from when they start going to school.
Even though they only compose 24% of the overall population, they also found that even though drug use is pretty much roughly the same across different racial groups, Native Hawaiians were arrested for cannabis possession 6 times more often than their share of the population here in Hawaii. And the same is true, as Kirsha said, for recent arrivals, people that come to Hawaii through the Compact of Free Association, from the Marshall Islands, from the Federated States of Micronesia, for very much the same reasons that Seth and Twyla explained. They tend to go to very specific neighborhoods that are more heavily policed. They don't have access to benefits, and very often they're targeted both by the police, but also generally by the system.
You're going into court and there's a disproportionate amount of a certain group of individuals. There is the systemic bias, I believe, that Seth is talking about. The judges have one type of impression of an individual, and that gets transferred to other individuals, and in addition to all the other reasons why there's no individualized assessment of an individual's risk or risks of failure to appear for court, there's those additional racial components at play. And one thing I just wanted to add onto that, because when we talk about new arrivals, immigrant communities here, that through the years there's been different groups that come in, and then it changes, there's different groups, and it's always that those groups are the ones that are disproportionately observed in the court system. So it's not, I don't want to give the impression that it's one particular group, it transitions through the years, but when Mateo was talking about, they gravitate to certain areas, some of those areas are housing areas, state housing facilities, and why that's those who are living in those types of communities cannot afford cash bail to be released. They cannot afford the bond. So then we look to alternatives, trying to secure some type of release through conditions with the court. And one of the practices in this jurisdiction is to look where the individual is going to be housed and determine whether or not the individual has permission from the landlord or the individual who owns the house. And if that is a state housing department, that means the individual would have to be on the lease and approved by the state to be in that particular home. And there are restrictions on that. If you have certain types of criminal offenses, you're not able to be on the lease for those types of housing. So now we're talking about these individuals not being able to gain release, not because they don't have a home, but because they can't secure the type of confirmation that the judges feel comfortable releasing them to that particular home. And that's because of their socioeconomic status, which is a result of the other factors we've already talked about.
The U.S. Constitution have to say about how we're supposed to set bail?
I would say not much to start with. The one amendment that's covered in the United States Constitution is the 8th Amendment. You have a right against excessive bail. And actually your state constitution also covers that as well under Article 1, Section 12. There's a U.S. case, Stack versus Boyle, that covers that by saying bail set at a figure higher than an amount reasonably calculated to fulfill the government's purpose is excessive under the 8th Amendment. And the court noted the importance of protecting the traditional right to freedom before conviction. So I think it's also important to recognize that bail has actually been mentioned throughout the history of our country. The framers of the Constitution actually included rights related to bail in the Magna Carta of 1215. It was mentioned in the New Testament, Acts 17:9. The Statute of Westminster of 1275. The Petition of Right of 1628, the Habeas Corpus Act of 1679, and the English Bill of Rights of 1689. All of those recognized your right to pretrial liberty through the act of bail. It's also important to know that the framers of the Constitution, when they enshrined the right to bail, to your right to have liberty, they noted that back in the day, the ability to be able to flee, which was much greater. There was open spaces and people could actually go somewhere. Now that's virtually impossible with cell phones, technology, internet, etc. So it's an old, antiquated idea to begin with, I believe, in that sense. And it's also important to know that surety back in the day was having a human being who could vouch for you. It was not contemplating this idea of a for-profit organization being involved. Your right to have an individualized bail hearing that we talked about, where the judge actually individualizes your hearing to you and your particular circumstances, is also derived from that case, Stack versus Boyle, and our 14th Amendment due process principles. The idea that you are required to have an individualized hearing, or since the function of bail is limited, the fixing of bail for any individual defendant must be based upon standards relevant to the purpose of assuring the presence of that defendant. So again, the idea that it must be an individualized hearing, and I will say again, the use of bail schedules are unconstitutional, and that law pertains to that directly. Your Hawaii Supreme Court also held that cash bail determinations must be made on an individualized basis, while commenting on the, quote, unfairness of conditioning bail on payment in cash only. That is your State versus Henley case, 2015 case here locally. You have a right to pretrial liberty, right to be free before you are convicted of a convicted of a crime. Under substantive due process law concept, your right to pretrial liberty is fundamental and it's intertwined with the presumption of innocence. Quote, in our society, liberty is the norm, and detention prior to trial or without trial is the carefully limited exception. That comes from United States versus Salerno, one of our leading cases from 1987, which talks about the importance of pretrial liberty. That's also been codified in your Hawaii statute, as it has already been discussed, but PR, or the promise to come back, is not used very widely here, unfortunately. Their bail hearing, it is deemed to be a critical stage in the sense that it can lead to your detention. And so in talking about how it's done here in Hawaii, you do not have a prosecutor who's present, and you definitely, it sounds like, don't have a defense attorney who's present to be able to argue to the judge on your behalf, to talk about your particular circumstances of whether or not you have a job, why you don't have a job, the fact that you have a treatment bed coming up, that you have kids at home, that you work at Safeway and you only make $8 an hour, etc., etc. That particular law has not been applied to the bail stage as of yet, which is unfortunate. It's only been applied in cases where it's your formal arraignment, where the formal charges are being added. In general, though, there's not much that is covered in the United States Constitution, which is why, in talking about the cases that we're litigating, it is an ongoing area of law that we are working on. Unsecured or other alternatives, one of the proposals that we see around the country that is very effective is the idea of court reminders through text messaging. It's relatively cheap compared to what we're seeing with regards to the cost of incarceration, $2 per person per year. We can also see a decrease in the failure to appear rates by as much as 57%, at least that's what occurred in one county where they were using that particular court date reminder. There was a decrease of the failure to appear rate in New York City by 36%, together with having an improved summons system, so the idea of giving people better notification on when to come to court. And we're seeing a flight risk, as was discussed earlier. Flight risk is not the same as failure to appear risk, very different. And I would also just note that if we just stop criminalizing mental health, drug addiction, and poverty, and quit having people come in the door in the first place, that would help right off the bat.
Save the homeless.
Let's spend some time talking about risk assessment tools. So while Seth is correct that it is a tool that by design and by theory it's supposed to lead to less bias, and I suppose it could if it was done well. But what we see is that risk assessment tools, you have racially inflected variables going in, you're going to have racially inflected variables coming back out. So in Hawaii, for example, Hawaii uses the ORES PAT, it's the Ohio Risk Assessment Tool. And it's a pretrial assessment tool. It weighs 7 factors to determine an arrestee's likelihood of failure to appear for a court date and the risk of a new arrest for a new crime, violent or not, while released pretrial. And those 7 factors are based on 4 particular topics: criminal history, employment, and residential stability. And drug use, excuse me, the 4th one. So I would first say that one of the things that it requires, the first factor, which is very concerning, is the arrestee's age at the first arrest. So we've already talked about school to prison pipeline and how juveniles are going to be treated differently, and if you're a person of color, how that already is impacting you. No other tool uses that. That is a very concerning factor that is taken into consideration with the risk assessment tool. The second factor looks at the number of failure to appear warrants in the past 24 months. In my experience as a public defender, I could have a client sitting in a different jail, and we would issue a warrant just to have that person transported to our county. So it had nothing to do with the willful failure to appear. It was a mechanism for the court to transport. And yet if that person went back into court again, it's going to look like they failed to appear, when I know that it was a transportation issue from the court. Third, the tool looks at whether the arrestee has 3 or more prior jail incarcerations. Well, let's talk about prior convictions, which is another tool that, or another factor that is being used with regards to risk assessment tools. If you have, for example, some drug convictions, and we know historically that drug convictions have race disproportionality associated to it, then that's going to present a huge problem already with the data that you're going to be looking at. So a study here in Hawaii found in 2013 on marijuana enforcement by David Nixon at the University of Hawaii found that Native Hawaiians were arrested for marijuana possession 6 times more often than their share of the population. And I want you to think about this. In California, Colorado, and Washington state, white people are making millions of dollars off of selling marijuana.
Yes.
And people of color are going to jail behind possessing marijuana.
Yes.
And then they're getting convicted for it, and it's adding to their score on a risk assessment tool.
Yes.
The 5th factor is the arrestee's residential stability, and we already talked about that, the economic factors that come into play when you're looking at these particular issues. And the 6th and 7th factors look at the arrestee's drug use. So again, it's this criminalization of drug addiction and their convictions behind drugs. I think it was already mentioned with the way the system works here is that the intake services, and it takes 2 weeks to already do that. But part of that system is the intake service person that interviews somebody who's arrested, booked into jail, takes all of this information into account. It's very important to understand that risk assessment tools are not individualized. They're based on a group. It's based on characteristics that you might share with that particular group. It's based on if you have those particular traits, perhaps you might deserve a second look, but it is not individualized to you, and it's very concerning because the risk assessment tool comes up with the conclusion based on a total score. It doesn't differentiate between if you're a failure to appear risk or if you're a risk of being a danger to the community. You just get one score that combines all of this information. Risk rating. A low rating indicates that there's a 5% chance of failure to appear and a 0% chance of a new arrest. A moderate rating indicates a 12% chance of failure to appear and a 7% chance of new arrest. An arrestee who scores 6 or 7 points will be rated as high, meaning they have a 15% chance of failing to appear and a 17% chance of a new arrest. Think about that. 17% chance of a new arrest, and you are a high risk. That is the worst category your risk assessment tool gives you. This is a tool, of my understanding, that was validated in 2013 based on 300 and some odd samplings of inmates, not even across the entire state of Hawaii. And this is the tool y'all are using in this state that's supposed to lead to less bias and people getting out of jail. This is your current system right now.
As far as defense counsel, we are provided with the report that says low, moderate, or high. We don't receive a point value, so we're not able to articulate to the judge that this person may have been assessed as a high risk, but their points were on the low end of the high risk category. It also makes it difficult to address the concerns that led to them being assessed as high risk, because there are different, the way the points are calculated, you can receive certain points because of your housing. But that's going to be reflected the same way as someone who may have violent criminal history. As far as points, you'll still be assessed as a low, moderate, high, regardless of where the points come from. It's just a reflection of the points. When they do these assessments, they meet with the individual. But if you're going to meet with an individual who English is not their first language, they're not able to provide that type of information. If you're meeting with an individual who has mental health issues and cannot articulate themselves clearly because of those issues, they will not be able to answer these questions. If you're meeting with somebody who was incarcerated, and at the time they were incarcerated, they were under the influence of some type of drug or even alcohol, they may not be able to articulate themselves to this person. And I bring that up because although it can take 2 weeks to do a bail report, there has been some improvement by the Oahu Intake Service Center to try and prepare these reports within the first 2 to 3 days when people are incarcerated, which, you know, the effort, we can understand the efforts to try to get these reports available, but when you're talking about individuals who may not be able to articulate themselves within those 2 to 3 days because of conditions they may be suffering from, and then that's the report that's presented to the judge for their initial request to try and be released, that becomes problematic. Articulate information. They want that information verified. And that can be problematic as well. You know, all of us have cell phones now. You know, if you ask me to give somebody's phone number for somebody that I just look up their name and call them, I can't always give that phone number. They're being asked these questions, they don't have their phone, and they can't provide the phone numbers for these people to verify the information that they are employed. They calculate these scores, it's unverified information, so they get points because they don't have housing and they don't have confirmation of employment.
Your public defender in your state, in this circuit, telling you that they're not given that information, they're just given the number, they're given the final rating, and there's nothing that they can do to argue against that, knowing that the judge is going to adopt that and make a release decision behind that score. They as well had a broad coalition between their ACLU, the prosecutors, public defenders, their courts. Granted, they had a culture shift in that particular state as well, to where everyone was on board with the reforms that they were doing. They had reforms passed effective January 1st of 2017. Cash bail is the last resort that they use. They have rigorous due process and pretrial services, considerable training and implementation, and their effective release rate of 94.2% in 2017. Of 134,620 people released, only 366 had their release revoked. So it can absolutely be done. Importantly, with regards to the bail discussion, there's absolutely no relationship between posting bail and public safety, because your bail bond that you pay, the secured money bail, is not revoked upon your new arrest, period. That's the reality. So it's just not tied to it.
It's a matter about creating a system where people can be monitored while they're pending their trial in the community to address those concerns. And so I think it just comes down to money.
Or in jail, obviously, for low-level crimes. Your 13,000 people that you are paying $60 million per year are not 13,000 murderers.
So because we are incarcerating so many people, because there are so many people in jail and our jails are overcrowded, we are actually increasing the risk of additional crimes. We're increasing the risk that when people get out, they will commit another crime. And the criminogenic effects of jailing and over-incarceration are huge. They are less visible, but they're there.
If you have judges that are not doing what they should be doing behind all of these concepts that we've discussed, vote them out. With regards to the legislature, same thing. If they're not passing laws that are codifying bail reform practices in your state constitution with release without conditions as your presumption, or creating robust procedures for bail reform, like prompt individualized bail hearings that allow for counsel to be present at that particular time, or creating presumptions of indigency for defendants who have an income at or below 125% of the federal poverty guideline, defendants who receive income-based public assistance, including SNAP or food stamps, TANF, SSI, SSDI, veterans disability benefits or other benefits, or defendants who are unable to meet basic living expenses without public assistance, including but not limited to their food, rent, mortgage, utilities, etc., or defendants who are involuntarily committed to mental health treatment in juveniles. That should be codified in a law that they are presumed indigent and entitled to public defenders and all of the services that come with that. With regards to your judges, they could codify their bail reform practices as well in creating the court rule with release without conditions as the presumption. They could create and utilize a form, an order on release, that walks them through exactly each step that they should take with each and every single person, so there's actually an individualized hearing where they have to write down their findings and they have to go through all the different steps of whether they're going to have an unsecured bond or other alternatives, electronic home monitoring, and then it's in writing, and it forces them to have to do it on the record in each person's case. They should have to take implicit bias training regularly and stay up on all of those particular issues. Stay engaged, of course, with the ACLU and work closely with your affiliate who is working very hard on all of these efforts. As he mentioned already earlier, you have 7 out of your 9 jails are over design capacity. A lot of people are held pre-trial, can just be released. You have a recent proposal, they're going to fill that. You can absolutely get your prosecutors, your judges, your local officials to talk about diversion programs and create community-based diversion programs.
And why that's important is because when we're talking about how can we make this happen, it's changing mindset. And for a lot of people, changing mindset is only going to happen when there's results. And if we're talking about a system that continues to incarcerate people pre-trial, there aren't opportunities to demonstrate that these individuals can be in the community safely while their case is pending trial before they're convicted, because the system just doesn't allow for it. But agencies like community bail fund agencies give an opportunity for individuals who would not otherwise be released to be out there, and for there to be some types of statistics or proof or verification that this individual that our system currently would not allow to be released due to various reasons, that this person was safely released into the community, this person completed their case and it was successful. And it's my hope with those types of results that we can start to try and change the mindset. But it is going to involve a complete overhaul with the way that our society, and I mean our society, our Hawaii community views these types of situations. But it's an individual step.
Funding law enforcement and how important that is, you have to insist on taking care of your public defenders. You have to insist that there's parity on the other side, that there are caseload limits, they're getting paid well, they have investigators, they have social workers. Make sure she is armed properly for people who are accused of a crime going into court. Make sure she has that report in hand, knows exactly what it means, so she can advocate. Because the reality is, all it takes to become her client is to be poor and to be accused of a crime. That's it.
So if you're interested on working on this, I mean, the good news is that in Hawaii it's actually relatively easy to get in touch with your representatives. You can make appointments and you can tell them that this is an important issue for you. We are having an election in November, and it's not just voting, but also if they have forums, if they're, go to your neighborhood board and ask them questions about what are they doing to reduce the number of people in jail and prison, because it is a safety issue. If we don't get the numbers under control, having more people in jail that are not getting rehabilitated, they are going to be in your community when they come out. And you should be asking them, what are they doing to make sure that, that there is actual rehabilitation, that we have the people in jail that need to be there, or in prison that need to be there, but not others that really don't need to be there.
This is Skye with FNN-Feminist News Network at the event about MoneyBail in Oahu at Marks and Arts Garage. We are here with Mateo and Twyla from New York, dealing with the situation of MoneyBail. Now, what I would like to ask you two in regards to MoneyBail, I know it doesn't compare to New York where you're from and the numbers are great, but what I was asking earlier about, how can we take the example you had mentioned, which I'm going to show you people because she talked about New Jersey earlier, and implement that into Hawaii?
I would first say New York's numbers still need to be worked on, first and foremost. But with regards to New Jersey, I would say that the biggest component that I see that helped with their success was culture change and getting everyone on board and on the same page. So I think first and foremost, you have to change the hearts and minds of the people who live here, people who are in power. Have your prosecutor, your public defender, your judges, your legislatures, ACLU involvement, community involvement. Actually, the most important component is probably community involvement. Have all of those entities come together and work together towards the bail reform, because that's what New Jersey did first and foremost to accomplish the goals that they have.
And I love that you said to vote. Now, you know that we have an issue here with the poor, and the same things with the high rate of legs straps and everything like that. How can we lessen any of that in regards to the bail also?
So you just make sure I understand the question. You're talking about, for example, folks that are undergoing housing insecurity and they might be out on the streets?
Well, let me state it like this. Is there any new laws ready to come on the books to help lessen the burdens of those economically strapped that get into parole?
So, unfortunately, no. We're kind of moving in the opposite direction in terms of, adding burdens on those that are economically strapped. For example, just next week, on Wednesday, the City and County of Honolulu will be hearing two bills, Bill 51 and 52, that are essentially criminalizing two things. One is being on the sidewalk while poor or while indigent, and the second one is sleeping or just resting in any public place, which, if you think about it, is crazy because that's what people come here to Hawaii to do. They come to sleep and rest on the beach. But of course, that's not how these laws are going to get enforced. They're going to get enforced against, people that are unsheltered, people that just because, as you said, are being left behind in one of the most expensive states in the country with the most expensive housing market. Instead of thinking about how can we help people, work.
Let me put a footnote in, people. We're paying 70% of our income on rent. 70%. Now, tell me how the law that passed in Idaho, because I heard you on PBS, yes I did, and how will that law work into that homeless situation with Bill 52 and stuff?
Sure. So actually it was not a law. What happened in Idaho was a court case. The Ninth Circuit recently held essentially that criminalizing the consequences of not having a permanent home is unconstitutional, is cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment. And what that means is that all these new laws that Honolulu is currently considering are constitutionally suspect, because what they do is they're criminalizing the unavoidable consequence of just being poor and not being able to afford a home. Things like sleeping out on the streets, sleeping out in a public park, when we know by the city's own numbers that about half of the people that do not have a permanent home in Honolulu cannot find a place to go every night. And it's very simple. We have about 5,000 people.
Especially the working class, because you have a lot of working homeless here.
Absolutely. So many of the people that...
They disproportionate that. I was a program director for chronic homeless in Mapunapuna that lived under the Nimitz Highway, Project Day. And they were always locking people up that needed to go to that job the next day. How do you work on that? How can Hawaii work on that?
Well, the fact of the matter is that it is difficult, but at the same time, is not not rocket science. We need to address our crisis in terms of not having enough affordable housing. That's the reason we have seen the number of people living without permanent homes increase over the years. But instead of spending money in increasing affordable housing, what we have been doing is criminalizing the people that, because they lost their jobs, because they have health problems that make them unable to keep a job.
Right.
We're criminalizing their circumstances instead of addressing the root causes. And the root causes are things, again, like housing, additional shelter, what they call wraparound services, which is, having more social workers, having more people...
Crisis workers also.
Crisis workers, and having more, services available in terms of mental health services, substance abuse services, and not just substance abuse services that...
There's a woman screaming out on the street in just her underwear right now.
Well,
there's nobody to come and take her to a hospital,
and they
won't do it.
And there's no one to call but the police, which is what most people do. Instead of being able to call, a social worker or a crisis, worker.
That should be the first person
that you can call so that she can be referred to the right programs.
In regards to bail on the homeless here in Hawaii and the bills being passed, now, how can places like New York, the East Coast, how can Hawaii learn from their statistics and their numbers and what's happening?
Well, certainly staying involved with the ACLU, because the ACLU is also involved on all of the work that we're doing around the country. But watching the litigation as it plays out, seeing our Campaign for Smart Justice approaches that we're taking in all of these different states, which again is working directly with community, working directly with stakeholders, people who are in positions of authority and power that can make decisions, and coming up with really smart solutions and having the time and the energy and the effort and the will, the courage actually, to try to push those policies into real action.
And I just want to add one quick thing, which is that a lot of the bills and so-called solutions being proposed at this point are really bills that aim at dividing us between the people that have a home and the people that do not have a home. The people that have means to
like the
bail.
assessing tools. How do we get rid of that assessing tool? Because we had an assessment tool for the homeless, and I was on that data committee with Partners in Care and Aloha United Way, where they were asking if they were working toward their master's degree. These tools are just obviously not, accessible to the people's concerns, needs, or wants.
And so what I would say, kind of echoing what Twyla said, is that, organize. And organize across every group. I think that the bills like 51 and 52 that criminalize poverty, they are aimed at essentially dividing us. But do not fall for that trap, because just like we just escaped 2 hurricanes that came our way, it could be any of us that will end up without a roof over our heads. Most of our houses were built in the 1950s. All it takes a hurricane for you or me to end up out in the streets. So instead of thinking of this as a problem, let's think of a way, so that all of us are lifted up and all of us have a better state.
We need more of that post-war, right after World War II where everybody was building for everybody and helping each other. The unions were growing strong, and we weren't trying to throw everybody in jail back then. But now, I don't even know what's going on. But I want to thank you for being here and working toward this issue. We're now back from the event. Now we're going to have a little panel talk in regards to MoneyBail. Now, what we really learned in Hawaii is that we do need this MoneyBail system, and criminalizing homeless is only adding to the problem of the MoneyBail system here in Hawaii. And you know, they have these, I'm a former program director of Project Date in Mapuna taking care of the chronic homeless that live under the Nimitz Highway near the airport in Mapuna. And, you know, those were people that had lived underneath that bridge for 12 to 20 years. You know, and to criminalize people that call that place home, it's just, it's wrong. It's wrong. The mayor is wrong on that. And to call it compassionate disruption when you're using the police every time. And what happened was, I was in Waikiki and I came across a situation where a man was laying on the ground, and the first thing one of the Waikiki ambassadors wanted to do was to call the police. And I'm asking, he says he's hurt. Why don't you call the ambulance? Let him do the first catch system or something, you know. But why are you calling the police? Because the police are going to criminalize them, put them into the system, and just add them to the list of people to harass every time they see them laying down or sitting down. And I'm like, you can do that. I gotta do my job. I'm doing my job. No, do the right thing. That's what you do. And no money bail is the right thing to do. And you know it. When there's 70% of your income being used on rent in this island, and the other 25% being used for food, leaving you with less than $5 to take care of your bills, so every bill that you get is running late. I don't care if your mortgage is $3,000 a month or $1,200. You are having issues here in Hawaii. And you know it, man. Or you know it, brah. Alright. So, let's take care of this no bail system. The laws that are currently being passed, the ACLU is going to fight, and they're going to win. Why? Because it's happened time and time again. And in other states within the mainland, like the one in Idaho that we're mentioning. And you know, there are good solid foundations out there where people are showing and doing things in the Big Island to take care of the evacuation situation. They have built up tiny homes. Yes, there is a group of church that, yes, it is a church group that's doing it, so they're paying for it. But one of the other ones, they're not. So this is how we need to think. There needs to be a tiny home revolution within Hawaii. They did pass a law for ADUs, but you know, everybody ain't got an ADU. But what you do have is a lot of scrap remnant land in Hawaii that's just big enough for those tiny homes. Now, that is straying off of the bail cash system, but I am giving solutions. Hello. That's better than giving nothing at all. Now, there needs to be bills passed, bills written, and apparently the ACLU don't have nothing to lobby at this point. So that's why I say vote. I doubled it up for you, because you need to find somebody to do the agenda of the no bail system and be able to get rid of that damn dog running around locking up locals. And you know what I'm talking about. So let's work on this, and if you have an idea and you want to put it in effect and you want to mention it on air, contact me at FeministNewsN@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out my Facebook page and like it, and the YouTube channel to get exclusive stories that only is for you. Alright, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining. Thanks for talking no bail. And remember, if you want to end mass incarceration in Hawaii, which is mainly Native, Indigenous people and people of color, and the new immigrants, like the Micronesians are the newest now. It used to be Samoans in the 50s and on and on. But, like what I'm saying, if you're tired of it, you know what to do. Alright, get motivated and make a move. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining. Peace.